Welcome to From the Crow's Nest, our AOC member only and subscriber bonus edition. I'm your host, Ken Miller, Director of Advocacy and Outreach for the Association of Old Crows. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly at host@fromthecrowsnest.org. Thanks for listening. All right, well, welcome back to everyone here in the live virtual studio audience. Again, if you're listening to this on Wednesday when we release this episode, which will come out tomorrow, Wednesday, January 22nd, and you are an AOC member subscriber, we cordially invite you to participate in future recordings when you can join our virtual studio audience and participate in the question and answer period. But I do want to thank all of the audience members for joining us here today. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you are in the audience and would like, you can see us, we can't see you, so please take a moment to go into the chat, say hi, let us know you're here. You can use whatever name you want, we don't care. Please use this time to send your questions, topics, or anything to us, and we'll get to as many as we can during this episode. I am pleased to have with me a returning regular guest, friend, colleague, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Jeffrey Fischer, author, journalist, subject matter expert, and AOC board member. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me back. It's always good to see you.
I always enjoy seeing your name on the docket for guests because I know that the conversation is going to go very easily. So I appreciate you taking time to join me here as we, for the first time in 2025, and we can talk a little bit about what's on the horizon. Just to kind of get things started while we get some audience members here introducing themselves. Let me just pull up the chat to make sure I'm following everything. Jeff, let's. There's a couple topics we want to get to today. We want to talk a little bit about EMS battle management. We're going to talk a little counter drone. We'll talk a little bit about some security forums that are taking place in the near future that our esteemed Colonel Jeff Fischer is going to be attending. But first, let's start with the elephant in the room, Jeff. The United States has a new President of the United States. The 47th President, Donald Trump, was inaugurated yesterday in what was arguably one of the most peaceful, nothing happening inaugurations I remember in a while. So what are your thoughts on the new president from your perspective, being overseas here in Vienna, Austria, and within the international community that typically has, obviously has a lot of concerns because, his inauguration does mean some potentially significant changes to how we relate to NATO, to the war in Ukraine, and so forth. So what are you hearing over there, and what are some of your reactions to the inauguration?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? I think that Europe has been bracing itself for the last 3 months for this day, right? I think they knew it was coming, right? So that and what's interesting is you see a lot of posturing by politicians across Europe, across NATO specifically. One of the Nordic countries has just announced that they've got a 127 million venture capital fund that they've raised to actually start bringing on some defense-related capabilities into the market space. You see Poland, foot stomping the 5% GDP for investment. You see the Baltics, like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, are very embracing and welcoming. But on the other side, you've got that old Europe, right? The old guard, pretty much led by Germany, that is and Scholz, who's going to be leaving soon, right? Their election's coming up. I don't see Scholz surviving. Germany is really divided. They've got immigration challenges. They don't have the ability to get to 5%, even if they wanted to, for GDP for defense spending. But more importantly, some of those newer nations have far less red tape, and you can actually bring to bear new companies, new startups, new systems, capabilities much easier. I mean, I laugh about this because how many years did it take Elon Musk to open his Tesla factory there? And it took him like 3 months to open the Tesla factory in China, right? Yeah. So when we talk about opportunity costs and labor costs man, old Europe is going to have to truly kind of figure out. They're going to be like California, I think you agree, right?
Yeah.
We're going to have to cut red tape and cut regulatory stuff to actually make stuff move. And at the end of the day, you kind of scratch your head and like, well, if we could cut it and things stay the same, then why did we have it, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So question about, kind of the perspectives of NATO countries, and you kind of touched on this, when during his first administration, obviously we know Trump put a lot of pressure on the NATO countries to up their spending on NATO, or, the threat of U.S. pulling out, which never materialized, but the countries did increase their support, generally speaking, across the board. I mean, there might have been some cases that were more or less, but NATO got stronger out of that in some ways, whether it's directly related to his pressure or not. But, then you have the war in Ukraine, and obviously NATO's leading that effort. And now Trump comes in and says, hey, what I said before wasn't quite enough. Now we need to go up to 5%. And you mentioned a couple countries that are like, absolutely, Poland, some of the Baltics, they want to see this. Some of the older guard countries are a little bit, giving more pushback. Is there any sort of kind of a fault line developing within any of the NATO countries that you're hearing? I'm like, hey, here, obviously it's in Poland and Baltic countries' best interest if NATO increases their spending, because they're next at some point, or potentially next, depending on how Ukraine figures out. But they want to obviously see a strong NATO, a well-funded NATO. You have other countries, obviously you mentioned Germany, that might have trouble getting up to 5%. How is that interplay between NATO countries? Is there something here that we need to keep an eye on in terms of how certain countries are leading the charge versus kind of putting up a little bit of a fuss about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'll chew at it in pieces, right? I would say that the German defense industry that is surviving is a German defense industry that is going to foreign opportunities. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. Rheinmetall, right? Land forces kind of building tanks, APCs, all the artillery, blah, blah, blah. They're moving a lot of their new development, their new production out of Germany. They're going to Lithuania. They're going to Poland. They're going to Bulgaria. And I would argue they're seeking labor costs that are far more in line with trying to sell the product, right? Mm-hmm. Normally, the German leadership would, the politicians would be going apoplectic on this because you're a German company that is not using German labor. But I think Rheinmetall, the writing's on the wall for Rheinmetall. It's like, look, if you force me to stay in Germany, we're just going to close. We can't make money at these labor costs. And you've got a politicians now that are almost like they don't know how to answer that. They can't cut costs. They can't they're letting Rheinmetall go because they need the tax revenue from big companies. Mm-hmm. But that's the first problem that I'd say. The second problem is the big divide that you have in Europe necessarily isn't along I would say economic or political fronts. Economic or military fronts. It's along political fronts, right? You've got two European Union and NATO allies who are, let's say, leaning very Russia. Right, mm-hmm. You've got Slovakia and you've got Hungary. Their leaders, respectively, are Fico and Orban, who are openly, touting and praising Putin that Ukraine has to relent. Mm-hmm. That they do not want any more EU money spent for Ukraine. They're blocking every Ukraine option that's coming out of NATO, which they can. I mean, NATO is a consensus-based organization, so this is drawing serious ire and angst from countries that share borders with Russia or have very close, geographic ties. Bulgaria, Romania. Romania's got an election too, and it might actually swing the other way, right? But you're in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland. A lot of them are getting very frustrated with these two nations.
So. With that, that's going to take a lot of diplomacy, and so a couple questions from the audience. And we'll deal with the second question here first because it's a good segue. But it's going to require a lot of diplomacy. Early cabinet. There's only been one confirmed cabinet pick so far, and that's Secretary of State. Marco Rubio got confirmed 99-0. Obviously, he's a senator. He had an easier path to confirmation than someone such as the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Controversial pick. We won't get into any of the controversy surrounding him. That's not the job of the show in particular, other than, those two individuals, assuming Hegseth gets confirmed here in the next week or so, those two individuals are going to lead a lot of discussions overseas and over in NATO and Europe. Are you hearing anything about the ability of these countries to work with Rubio or Hegseth, that what they bring to the table, if anything? What are some of the concerns with those individuals kind of leading the diplomatic charge, so to speak, for the new Trump administration?
Yeah, so I haven't heard anything, and there's probably good reason for that, right? The first reason is I think that Donald Trump right now is laser focused on domestic issues, right? I think that is 99% of the oxygen in the room for him right now. I would also say that if I were him, especially based on my first administration, I would probably hold off on my exercising foreign influence at this point until I had my confirmations for my ambassadors. I don't know if the listeners know this, but basically the day before the election, every ambassador in the United States submit the resignation. And whichever president wins, they get the stack of resignations, and then they say, "No, I don't accept your resignation. Okay, I accept yours," and they go through the whole thing, right? So there are many ambassadorships in Europe right now that are empty, and that means that the person in charge is called the chargé d'affaires, or the deputy chief of mission, which is a state. State.gov employee, right? A Department of State employee that's been around for a very long time. And Trump probably doesn't feel too comfortable pushing on a career diplomat to exercise, let's say, some of his more nuanced foreign policy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that's good, because I think that's often we hear about the cabinet members, but we forget. And you've had experience on diplomatic staff, so kind of the important roles that these posts will have in those diplomatic conversations. So yeah, that's actually interesting, and we'll see what happens. Now, the other part of this is obviously yesterday he's been president for one day, but usually it's the first day that's extremely busy with executive orders. I'm not going to quiz you on how many executive orders he signed, because I don't even know. It was a lot. But were there any particular executive orders that kind of caught your attention from the defense and military standpoint? I mean, obviously I won't even begin to feign familiarity with all of them, but was there anything in terms of whether it's Ukraine or even just in terms of how we approach government that caught attention?
There's two that I found that piqued my interest, that I want to read the devil's in the details, right? And the first one is he talks about making the southern border a military mission. Mm-hmm. There are some really interesting political nuances, and legal nuances there. And if there's military folks listening, they probably know this really well, right? Active duty military can only be executed in what's called a Title 10 authority. They don't have law enforcement capability. Posse comitatus is an issue. But however, when a National Guard entity is mobilized for peacekeeping, right, or for disaster response, they can do what's called Title 32 or Title 10, right? So they could do law enforcement type things. I can't think of an example in U.S. history where there was a mobilization of the military within the United States that wasn't a disaster response and didn't fall under civilian control of the authority. The border, right, is owned by CBP and is owned by border officials and is owned by the Department of Homeland Security. To make it a military mission now, how does the chain of command operate? Does NORTHCOM own the border now? Because normally it does NORAD, stop and bear bombers from coming into the ADAS. So this is going to be interesting to see how that plays out, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying we're going to have to. There's going to have to some legal mojo. There's lawyers probably fist pounding desks right now trying to figure out this in Washington D.C., which that's good. That's what they get paid for. And I think the second one that I think piqued my interest was the 51 senior intelligence guys who've lost their security clearance now for the letter that the Hunter Biden laptop thing, right? I think that there's more than enough information now that the U.S. government knew that was Hunter Biden's laptop, and that letter was a little disingenuous and timely disingenuous. So I don't think it's shocking, and I think that is probably a good lesson to perhaps everyone else who does have security clearances that these things are important and they need to be managed the right way.
Great. Well, I want to with the remaining time, we welcome more questions. We can always revisit this if more audience members have questions about the new administration, about the war in Ukraine. Just to kind of wrap this up, where do you see? I mean, his statements yesterday in his inauguration were very measured. In terms of how the U.S. is going to affect the war in Ukraine. There are a lot of nuance in his comments about, making sure that, we get into wars we want to get into and that we are, of course, victorious in those wars and we just don't keep them going. And I think that's at least on some level, what he's looking at the war in Ukraine is not so much ending it today because he's opposed to it, but because he doesn't want to keep the war going. Real quickly, what are a couple things you're looking for moving forward here in terms of the war in Ukraine that will really kind of help you understand how the Trump administration is going to approach this, or what change he's going to bring to the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, if you follow me on X at Jeff Fish, you know full well that I always joke that it's day one, the war in Ukraine is going to be over. No, it's not, right? And I said it wasn't going to be, and I said that it was, and no matter how many times I bagged my head against, the Trump supporters, they're like, no, he's going to end it. It's day one. I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to happen, right? You clearly do not understand the nuance of this war. I would say even if there's a deal cut on this war, the chances of it not becoming and devolving into an insurgency, counterinsurgency are ridiculously low, right? That's going to happen. Ukraine is going to continue to fight for them to get their land no matter what. Does Zelensky want peace? Yes, I have no doubt about that. I mean, everyone wants peace. And I'm not trying to be pejorative. I listened to the National Security Advisor for Trump now. I just lost his name. The new National Security Advisor. Anyway, he basically came out and he said, look, he goes, everybody wants peace. I don't think that there's anyone against that. We are going to go secure peace. And I agree with him. Everybody does want peace. I mean, I want peace and harmony. I would love to live in a utopianistic society. The truth of the matter is the context matters, right? What does he expect? Let's see the deal, right? Donald Trump doesn't say, well, everybody should own a building. So, okay, I'm going to give away buildings. No, let's see the details of selling buildings. That matters, right? There's a reason the contracts are, 50 pages long, because the details matter. I think that, General Kellogg has got a horrible challenge on his hands because he's the guy he's the envoy for the Russia-Ukraine war. I understand from the scuttle I've heard, he's brought his initial proposal to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump said, nope, that's not acceptable. And he's like, well, then I need 100 days for this. So I don't see anything happening for 100 days. Okay. 3 months, a minimum of 3 months.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of, I think Trump kind of welcomes that, because I think domestically, as you mentioned, a lot of his attention is domestic right now. That gives him some space to get some domestic priorities done here in the early going, particularly in taxes and energy. That then hope I think you'll see him diving in a little bit later in the year. So we'll see how that materializes. But with that, I wanted to bring up a couple other topics that we discussed here before we came on the air to get your perspective on. Obviously, we've talked every single time we discussed the war in Ukraine on this show. We mentioned how it really is a war within the electromagnetic spectrum. It 100% has to do with how we approach superiority in the spectrum that's dictating outcomes. So as it's gotten more complex, a more complex battle environment, battle management is a critical component to this. So what are you seeing on this topic, developments in this area that give you either, kind of help you understand how the trajectory of this war over there in terms of EMSO battle management?
Yeah, so I just had General Deptula on my show, right? Who's the dean of the Mitchell Center, right, for Air Studies, and we talked a little bit about it. And we didn't go into great detail, but our discussion actually kind of gave me a jumping off point to kind of think about this. And I will tell you that from everything I'm seeing, the spectrum war in Ukraine is just getting worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse, to the point that now commercial airliners in Europe are declaring emergencies and diverting because they're losing GPS, right? So there is now a financial impact, right, to Europe for the cost of war. A Ryanair flight that was supposed to come into Vienna lost GPS and it diverted into the Czech Republic, right? So there are serious consequences to this. An airplane didn't crash, I get it, but there is a financial cost to Ryanair that they're going to have to suffer. And that those things are going to only continue, right? And when I try and this is for our EW warriors out there in the audience, right? When I try and explain how bad the spectrum is, here's the example that I use. The busiest airspace in the world is the airspace over London, right? Mm-hmm. There are 6 commercial airfields in London that service London and the surrounding areas. 6. In addition, you've got a vast number of airplanes that fly over London on jet routes because that's the standard route to come into Europe, right? So now imagine, if you will, all of those airplanes ended up having no controllers. The pilots are not really trained. They're just amateur guys. There's no standard instruments or standard departures. It's just, there's an airfield, I'm going to go fly in there. There's no altitude. There's no ICAO standards, right? There's no national standards of what altitude you're supposed to be at when. It's just an open circus for every single airplane that wants to. And now multiply it by 10, right? That image is what's going on in the spectrum in Ukraine. And it's become so unmanageable that now both Ukraine and Russia have moved to mass production of FPV drones, first-person view drones, that are single-use. You can fly it right into a target and blow it up, with fiber optic cabling. 10 kilometers of fiber optic cabling. And the reason they're doing that, it's not even cable, it's really a fishing line, but the reason they're doing that is because the spectrum is not reliable. And they don't want to waste time, energy, and effort on a communication system that it's failed them. Mm-hmm. It's a massive problem. When we talk about EW and the spectrum as a domain and how we manage it, how do you do EW battle management? I would tell you that there's a lot of smart people, and I'm not saying I'm not trying to be a jerk to them, right? But I would tell you, I think we're fooling ourselves as EW warriors when we say that we right, will come up with a plan to do EW battle management. Mm-hmm. And I say that because of this. The land domain, for the most part, is a 2-dimensional domain. Right? Latitude, longitude. Okay. Yes, I realize there's a little bit of elevation, but let's just stick with latitude and longitude. You bring time into the equation, you've got 3 dimensions, right? Okay, cool. Right? Air, space, and naval warfare are 3-dimensional, right? Bring in time, you've got a fourth dimension. For the spectrum, it's not a three-dimensional battle space, right? Because at any XYZ axis in the battle space, you can have zero frequencies all the way up to 18 to 20 gigs, right? Mm-hmm. So you really have a four-dimensional battle space. And if you add time, you've got 5 dimensions. To think that in an air operations center, 4 guys sitting in the EW battle management cell, right? Or in the naval operations center in a NOC, or in a division headquarters, you've got maybe 10 guys can manage this real time. I mean, I heard you laugh, right? Because it's a joke. Mm-hmm. When we talk about trying to manage an airspace, because I'm an airman, right? We'll just talk about airspace. You have a combined air operations center that has hundreds of people, right? That build air tasking orders on 72-hour churns. And not only do you have that, but you also got the real-time air battle managers that are either on the ground or in AWACS that are managing the space real time. So we're now talking thousands of people dedicated to managing a domain that is only 3 dimensions. Why would we think we could get away with 4 dimensions plus time 5 dimensions with just a handful of people, right? We can't.
So at AOC 2024 last month, you go through the exhibit hall. There's a lot of people out. There's a lot of technology being demonstrated about analyzing spectrum, understanding what's out there, understanding how to respond to whatever you do see. And are you saying that basically it's the challenge of operating in the spectrum, of managing the spectrum, it's less technology and more manpower? And if it's more manpower, then how do you? I mean, we obviously have to invest more in education and everything like that. But can we even solve that with manpower, or is it a matter of going full in to, AI capabilities to ensure that that the technology is fast enough? Because you're right, humans can't do 4 to 5 dimensions of work.
Well, they can when they're singing music from the 70s, right? So,
I'd rather not. I'd rather that not be the inspiration for our spectrum warriors. But I mean, hey, you know what? Whatever works.
Bell bottoms and skin tight. But no, it's all good. Look, I agree with you. I don't think. I think. The pitch that I just made, by the way, is in part to say yes, the spectrum should be a domain. But the last thing I think at this point is I don't think you could throw enough manpower at this problem to solve it, because you need brilliant minds, every single one who could think in 5 dimensions real time and be able to solve this. I think where you're going to go, where this is going to lead to, is a solution set that like Andrew Karpathy came up with for when we talk about artificial intelligence and how do you build artificial intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. Or, Andrew Karpathy's concept is what, Tesla used for their foundation to build full self-drive, where I'm going to put just a bunch of cars out and I'm just going to let them make mistakes and every mistake goes to the master computer, right? Mm-hmm. To where it stops making mistakes. And if you have 4 million cars now, right, that's what we have. Tesla has 4 million cars. Then that gonculator of how to drive is just getting smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. I would venture to say that a entrepreneuring entity that sits there and says, okay, I'm just going to create a bunch of receivers and I'm going to have it feed information to a gonculator, right, a brain, and let that brain monitor training environment after training environment after training environment, and let it build concepts and ideas and decision-making processes and what's right or what's wrong, to the point where that'd be kind of cool. And then, oh, by the way, now I can move that into a battle space. And let's say with that AI, I can go, okay, if you have these situations, I need a man in the loop. I need that EW battle management cell, right? Those EW guys sitting in the cell to make the decisions. But everything else can be run through AI, where imagine, if you will, an EW battle management cell that knows enough to send a message traffic on link 16 to a flight of 4 F-16s to say, hey, dudes, your flight route is going to lead you right into jamming on your main strike frequency. It'd be a good idea to coordinate now.
Yeah.
get there and then you can't talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be really cool EW battle management, right? That would be analogous to the AWACS guy going, hey, 4 ship of F-16s, you're literally flying right towards the border of, I don't know, Iran? Probably soon. You should turn, right? So that to me is EW battle management.
But and you know, you kind of you make a good point that the rationale, or almost the insanity that you would suggest, you know, like we would never allow our pilots to fly close to the border without any sort of ISR to let them know where they're at, and yet we kind of do this, but we do that with Spectrum. It's almost a double standard in terms of the layered kind of intensive capabilities that we kind of help we give to our warfighters to understand the Spectrum. We don't have the same standard in the Spectrum that we do in every other element of warfare. So how do we get up to speed on that today? Because if we can't keep up with the Spectrum environment in Ukraine, how do we think we're going to keep up with the Spectrum environment anywhere else in the world that we operate? Because everybody I mean, whether it's proxy wars or whether it's, you know, you have the Chinese, you have Russia there, obviously, or you have their allies that they're working with in China and some, you know, Iran and Middle East and stuff like that. So they're involved. You know, so if we can't figure that out in Ukraine, how are we going to figure that out in Asia or anywhere else in the world that you know, President Trump might be thinking is of important national interest?
Yeah, great question. I would tell you the sad answer is we will continually fund electronic warfare to the very minimum level that we have to, and that 25% or 30% of the budget will go to the Navy, 30% will go to the Air Force, and 30% will go to the Army. And just like every other year, no matter what the requirements and priorities are, and the remaining 10% will go to OSD and Joint Staff to keep the Pentagon lights on, and that's going to be the answer.
So the answer is to double down on doing the wrong thing.
No, the right answer, right? The right answer, if you will, is to go back to 1990 when I was an EW guy, and you know, I was in EW school at Mather Air Force Base, and they told me, dude, you know, my instructor said, did you know, before you turn that transmitter on, did you know that, you know, jamming is an act of war? Right? According to international law, jamming is an act of war. I would tell you that jamming today actually has less consequences than ripping off the mattress tag off your bed. Mm-hmm. Right? You know, the little tag on your, do not remove this, is against the law. Yeah. Okay. Jamming has less consequences than removing your bed.
Well, that's an interesting take. So, would you say that basically the way that the war in Ukraine has materialized and the implications for Spectrum, that it's actually given us the right time to go back in to have that debate on Title 10, Title 50?
I think it is. Right? And I would tell you that if
we've talked about that a long time, but it's never been the right time. But maybe now's the right time.
If you've got commercial airliners who are flying over cloud decks who lose their GPS, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're like, and they feel scared enough to the point that they're going to divert to other airfields. Imagine what happens if, you know, heaven forbid, and I'm not wishing this, by the way, so please realize that it's a horrible situation. But instead of MH17 being shot down by a surface-to-air missile, it crashes into the side of the mountain because it lost its GPS, right? Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, and when we choose to say, okay, what are we going to do about this? I mean, if I was king for a day, the first thing I'd do is I'd tell every nation, we're going to have an international standard for frequency allocations. The fact that you can buy a drone in Europe and in the EU and take it to the United States, and it's against the law, right? Air quotes added, right? It's against the law to use that drone in the United States because it operates in a frequency range that's not the commercially assigned range. Well, holy shit. Think about that, right? Mm-hmm. We just saw motorcades of the president driving around with what appears to be, let's say drone jammers or communication jammers on the top. Well, do you think those drone jammers are intended to jam frequencies that that European Union drones operate on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, okay, yeah, great. You stopped all the American ones, but all I had to do was bring a drone in. Do you know how easy it is to bring a drone from another country in the United States?
I've never tried it.
I mean, okay, bring it into Canada and just drive it south.
Yeah.
I mean, it's comical, right?
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, what happens when someone figures out that they can actually take, let's say, the harm guidance system and slap it into a drone, right? I've got a home on jam capability of a drone. Now, you don't even need to jam me. As a matter of fact, your jamming of my drone is actually, it's like a moth to a flame.
It's giving you a location. Yeah.
You're giving me the guidance to come attack you, right? Which is that's going to be the next evolution of electronic warfare. It took many, many years to go from radars to radar jamming to radar now, destruction of enemy air defenses to go in and actually strike it. In the drone world, we're seeing, drones, and now we have drone jammers. We're going to have, drone, no kidding, going after the jammers and striking them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this is going to be. I'd like to. Hopefully, on this show, we can use this show as a platform to kind of dive into this element, because I think that what concerns me as someone who's watched this for 25 years now, everything that we talked about back in the late 90s still holds true today. Including even what you mentioned, kind of that remark about going back to 1990. Like we've long thought, like, hey, we've got to get back to the way we were on some of these issues. It's just gotten more complicated. So hopefully we can use this platform, others like it, to kind of keep the pressure on this, because I don't think that we can only keep kicking the can down on this so much. I mean, we've had on this show a number of different guests talking about different reform efforts. We just had, PPBE, acquisition reform, all these other things. And at the end of the day, it really, as we discussed even at our live episode at the convention, which we're going to air next week, I think, it was a great conversation. But, it came out that, a lot of these efforts just don't actually do anything that we need. It's moving deck chairs. It's not, the substantive reform we need. So how do you actually get there? I mean, I think the Trump administration, they have some ideas, but whether or not they're going to be effective in actually making progress in this area, we'll have to wait and see. But really interesting thoughts. I do want to make sure that we get to all attendee questions. So there's another question that came in. And this is an interesting question, because this gets into some of the outside of the normal, this gets into the complexity of public policy with the new administration, and particularly energy policy. President Trump made a few comments yesterday about energy, declaring he's going to declare a national energy emergency. But he's talking about making sure that U.S. becomes an exporter of global energy. And of course, that is going to have implications on other countries that I don't know the percentage of how much foreign energy we import versus export this time. I'm not here to make and I don't know all the details, but certainly moving us from a net importer to a net exporter is going to have implications on security, particularly in Asia and Europe. What are your thoughts in terms of how U.S. energy policy could play into how we approach diplomacy and foreign policy, and as well as military policy over in that region?
Yeah, well, I mean, when politicians say, drill, baby, drill. I sometimes think that there's Americans out there that think someone's going to take a Skillcraft drill and actually point it down in the dirt and then, boom, hey, I got oil, right? I mean, the sad part is even if you approve drilling permits, the amount of time it actually takes to get to the point where you have, a viable flow of energy that's sustainable, or oil coming out of the ground takes a long time, right? Now, We have assets up in Alaska that actually we could probably increase the output and outflow, which is great. It's going to take time. My bigger issue with energy is not so much the U.S. energy policy. I like the fact that it's an energy policy and that we're going for it. I think that's good. I think we should be a far more energy independent. Our European brothers and sisters, even though there's been sanctions on Russia for years and years, the amount of Russian energy that flows into Europe is amazing, right? There's tons of oil and energy that flows from Russia into India. India refines it. Now it's an Indian product, right? So India can sell it, and Europe's more than happy to buy the refined product. India doesn't recognize the embargoes on Russia, and this is which might change, right? The leader of India is actually a really good friend of Donald Trump. Let's see if he can make a deal, right? I mean, that's what he does. So, what I would rather see is a energy policy globally that actually puts more of these punitive pressures on Russia that should be driving it into the ground, but are not. How's that?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
All right.
That's. Do you have any final words? Let me just put it this way, because we covered a lot of ground here. I think we touched on just about the entire world here in about 40 minutes. But I do want to respect everybody's time and our listeners, but and begin to wrap this up. If there are any more questions in the audience, please get them in now so we can get those in there. But we've had a number of really good questions today coming from them. So what, any final thoughts in terms of where kind of what you think, what you're looking for on the horizon?
Yeah, thanks, because there are a couple things I want to touch on, right? And my ADD throws me all around.
And now that you just said that, a few things have popped in my mind. So we're just gonna keep going now.
All right, perfect. The first one is, AOC Rome is coming up in Europe, or AOC Europe in Rome. That's the right answer. Is coming up soon. What I would ask all of my AOC Crow brethren and sisterin, now that I'm a board member, my push is to grow, right? So even if you can't get to AOC Europe, get a new member in, get some energy going about AOC Europe. I think it's going to be phenomenal. I'm going to go. I'm trying to get Bob to invite me as a speaker again. We'll see if I can cross the finish line. But membership and attending these conferences is critically important. By the way, if any of you ever see me at a conference and you want to pull me aside and ask the questions, please feel free to do that. I am not. I put my pants on the same way as everybody else, one leg at a time. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is there is no better advocate for the spectrum than you. Right? All of the listeners out there, if we're not the ones standing up and touting what we do and why we believe the EMS is critically important, and we do, or we wouldn't be listening to this show, let's be honest, right? Then it doesn't, if you can't advocate it, then why should someone else? I would love to see at a point where we can have a Billy Mitchell in our community stand up and say, hey, I'm gonna sink an aircraft carrier with EMS. I'm gonna down an airplane, drone with EMS. I'm going to do these things and then prove it's the value and worth. But, that to get there, we need to generate energy. So I'll land right there. Great.
And you have another opportunity coming up in February you wanted to mention.
I do. The Munich Security Conference is coming up, which is where, presidents and secretaries of state and secretaries of defense, those all go. I'm attending. I got an invitation. I was in Munich last weekend at another event, and folks heard me talking. They're like, hey, we want you at the Munich Security Conference. Can you come? It's very funny, though. I have to confess, I got the coolest invitation to the Munich Security Conference, right? So I'm going to the Munich Security Conference breakfast, which is actually at Hofbrauhaus. And it's Weisswurst or white sausages and beer breakfast, and then there's a discussion, and I don't know if they're trying to get me drunk for a reason or have me drink for a reason, but I'm doing the Munich Security Conference breakfast. Most likely I'll be on the panel with NSPA General Manager, NATO Sustainment and Procurement, agency, and we're going to be talking about what can Europeans do to buy, hint, hint, the electromagnetic spectrum, to actually bring disruptive technology cheaper into the battle space to counter some of these more expensive things. I mean, I hate to say this because I got a lot of friends at Lockheed and BAE and other places, but the truth of the matter is, if $100 million of R&D buy down stealth capability by another 10%, and we're already at 0.2 meters cubed, is a $100 million investment to get to 0.18 meters cubed that's worth this squeeze. Now, I realize there's a lot of people out there say, yep, okay, good on you. I would say that just like every other thing that we continually invest in that gets more expensive and more expensive and more expensive, eventually something's going to come in and upset that apple cart for something that's extremely cheaper. And I think that at this point, the spectrum is ripe with those opportunities.
Well, we'll have to have you at an appropriate time after that, have you back on to kind of talk about what you learned at that conference. I think that's a great opportunity, and we need more people like you taking advantage of these opportunities to talk about spectrum and the need to finally get it right, because we talk about the same problems over and over again. And you're right, we do need those Billy Mitchell type of figures to stand up and be problem owners, quite frankly. Without them, we're never going to be able to address those matters. Well, Fish, it's great to have you on the show once again. Happy New Year to you. 3 weeks into it. Hopefully everything's getting off to a good start with you. And really appreciate you taking time to join me here from the Crow's Nest.
Thanks, buddy. It's always good to be here. Take care, buddy.
Yep. Well, that will conclude this episode of From the Crow's Nest, our bonus edition for AOC members and subscribers only. As always, we enjoy hearing from our listeners, so please take a moment to review, share, subscribe to this podcast. Of course, if you are a member or subscriber, you can also join us in the virtual studio audience for these episodes and ask your questions, comments, tell us what's on your mind. Even if it doesn't really relate directly to EW, this is your time. So please take a moment to join us, or you can email me your questions and comments in advance. We're always happy to bring them up on the show. And you can email me at host@fromthecrowsnest.org. That's it for today. Thanks for listening.
Off topic.